So I was reading all that, you know, and I was having these nightmares, and I was trying to figure out what the hell it was about belief systems, and how things had gone so astray, especially in the 20th century. So now, I was reading Nietzsche at that point, and I read parts of Thus Spake Zarathustra, which is not a book by Nietzsche that anyone should read until they read everything else he wrote, because it's nothing like anything else he wrote. It's this weird sort of Old Testament-like poetry, and it's, you know, it's revelatory in some sense, so it's a very strange book. But it's in that book where Nietzsche announces the death of God. And he has a prophet, Zarathustra, come down from a mountain into a marketplace and tell everyone that God is dead, you know, and he says, God is dead and we have killed him, and where will we ever get enough water to wash away the blood, which is the part of Nietzsche's quote that no one ever refers to. So, I mean, because people like to think of Nietzsche's statement as triumphal in some sense. God is dead. It's like, yeah, but Nietzsche knew what was coming, because back in the 1880s, because he was a real prophet, this man, like Dostoevsky. I don't know how they did this. Nietzsche said in his notebooks in Will to Power that there's two things that were going to happen to the human race because of the death of religion. One was that people would become nihilistic, and the other was that they would become totalitarian. And he said that what would happen in Europe in the next century, so this is like 20 years, 15 years before the 20th century started, that there would be hundreds of millions of people dying as a consequence of the conflict, basically between communist presuppositions and classic Western presuppositions. It's like, you know, when the wall fell in 1989, no one predicted it. It was like everyone was left dumbfounded by that event, you know, so predicting what's going to happen tomorrow, that's impossible. Predicting what's going to happen in a whole century, 15 years before it starts, it's like you got to think someone's tapped into a very deep, deep underground vein to be able to do that. But he thought about it as a ideational necessity. It's like, because for Nietzsche, once the idea of God was killed, he believed that the entire moral structure that was predicated on that idea, which was its fundamental assumption, would be shaken to its core. Because it's like the foundation piece was knocked out, and everything would be up for grabs. If that's not true, then what? Well, that's a theme that Dostoevsky explored too, continually. It was Dostoevsky, who Nietzsche had read, and even more than I thought, as I found out recently. Dostoevsky's take on it was that, well, if there's no God, then you can do anything you want. Everything is permitted. There's no morality whatsoever. And all there is, and Nietzsche also pointed this out to some degree, because Nietzsche said most people's morality is cowardice. He didn't say that morality was cowardice. He said that people cover up their cowardice by pretending that they're moral when they refuse to do things that they're terrified of. It's like, it's a nasty little comment, and it happens to be true. So Dostoevsky as well at the same time was exploring what might happen from a political perspective, for example, if his ideas about the death of God were true, that everything would be permitted if God was dead. And he wrote a book called The Devils, or The Possessed, which I would also highly recommend, especially if you read it with the Gulag Archipelago, because they're like, Dostoevsky predicts what's going to happen, and then Solzhenitsyn describes what happened, and they're the same thing. It's rather staggering, actually, and especially because, you know, there wasn't anything more powerful written in the 20th century than Solzhenitsyn's books, and there wasn't anything written in the 19th century that was more powerful than Dostoevsky's books, so like, that's a 1-2 punch. So,